Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'm here with Brian Niemeier, and we're going to talk a little bit about giant fighting robots. I apologize for the short delay. For some reason, I couldn't get audio to go out so that Brian could hear me. I could hear him, but he couldn't hear me. So that would have been a very interesting one-sided conversation where he could guess what I was trying to say based on movement of my lips, and then attempt to say something back. How you doing, Brian? Yeah. It's okay. Sometimes technical difficulties happen. Hopefully everybody will forgive me for that. Just as a reminder before we get started, Brian is the author of Combat from Exeed, and the newest one is called 40-Second Coming, or CY 40-Second Coming. So if you check the chat, you should have a link to that. If you want to check out his book. Today's the last day for anyone that cares to buy my giant Christmas special, the Fantasy Christmas Spectacular 2019. This will be unpublished, I think, tomorrow at some point. So if you order the paperback, it should be able to ship out tomorrow. But definitely, if you haven't gotten it yet and you still want this giant tome that has 10 of my books in it, now's the time to get it because it's going to be gone forever. I've been seeing lots of people send pictures of this as like I don't know if you call this like a door stopper because it's like the size of the door. You know, it's big. It's like a textbook. And that was how I was able to offer it for only $20. $20 for what's the equivalent of about $100 worth of paperbacks. So you really are getting a deal if you buy the paperback. Same thing with the ebook for $9.99. It's equivalent of about $40 worth of ebooks. So hopefully people find that that's a good deal and they, they'll buy it. So let's talk about some giant robots, and let's talk about the mecha genre, as I like to call it. How would you define the mecha genre, Brian?
Well, before I do that, the chat is saying they're having some trouble hearing me. They're asking if you can turn me up a bit.
Oh, there we go. Yes, let's try now.
Testing. All right, how's that, chat?
Okay, there we
go. Hear me better?
That's my fault.
No, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so how would you define the mecha genre?
Okay. The mecha genre is about robots. Mecha is just really the word that the West applied to just called the robot genre in Japan. And I mean, its history, like all things in science fiction, really goes all the way back. I mean, you could even consider like the Martian tripods from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, or like the super machines from Jules Verne's Master of the World as mecha. What we think of as mecha really got kicked off in the 60s with like Astro Boy, and then in the 70s with Mazinger Z by Go Nagai, which was really my introduction to mecha.
You can't define the mecha genre. The genre defines you. Yeah, so I look at the mecha genre, and there's actually some crossovers if you look at... So my introduction to the mecha genre really came in the 80s from several of these Japanese shows that American animation companies would kind of chop up and put together to make like Robotech. I don't know if anybody remembers. Robotech was actually made out of Macross and I think one or two other shows, but I don't remember exactly what shows. But if you're sitting there talking about Robotech, people are going to be like, well, you should just watch the original Macross shows, which are probably better. But they did that also one called Voltron. Now, Voltron technically might be in what I think some people call the Ranger genre. If you don't know that much about everyone knows about the Ranger genre because most people have seen Power Rangers, which is actually an adaptation of a Japanese TV show called Ranger Force. I'm trying to remember the translation, but they would reshoot all the parts that weren't giant fighting robots, and instead, so they reshoot all those parts with American actors, and then you would just watch them in their costumes and their mechs do the giant fighting robot part would always be shot in Japan. But Voltron's an example of that because it has something about there's a person, they have a robot, the robots make a bigger robot, and each person has a different kind of robot, so it's a kind of a weird little crossover, but it's its own. I think it's its own little genre in Japan as well.
Yeah, Super Sentais.
That's
Is
it.
what they call them. There's definitely an overlap with Mecha. I mean, when Marvel licensed the Spider-Man manga in Japan, they wasted no time in giving him his own giant robot.
Yes, I remember that. And that was actually, I don't really like this movie, but the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie had a Japanese Spider-Man that was a girl in a Spider-Man robot, you know. I don't know if that was actually part of some, you know, some distant Japanese adaptation of Spider-Man or what, but I remember thinking that was kind of funny. There's also like this Western, I don't know what to call it. There's always a filter that you look at when you're looking at anything outside your culture. And so the Western distillation of Japan includes like robots for some reason. And it's funny because I remember I was in LA one time. I'm trying to remember what I was there for. I think it was for like a wedding show because I was getting married at the time and like my wife was looking at wedding stuff. But in the convention, it was at the Anaheim Convention Center, I think, and then like next door to it was a mecha convention where people were trading like all of their mecha toys. And that was the whole convention. It was like old Super Sentai toys and, you know, old Macross toys and of course Gundam. Gundam had a whole bunch of different toys and Transformers as well. Transformers I don't know if you would call Transformers part of that mecha genre. To me, I think what encapsulates the mecha genre is that it's a person inside a mech. It's a person inside the robot. And what I like about it is that you get to reintroduce, in a futuristic sense, some things which have kind of gone by the wayside with technology. So you get to have a technological setting, but have some things that you miss, which is like, you know, close combat fighting. This idea that you can be inside of a highly technological thing, but there's still an active warrior. There's a warrior element to it rather than, I guess, it's even more prescient now when a lot of combat takes place in the form of like drones blowing people up. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it gives you the best of both the sort of Tom Clancy nuts and bolts, gun otaku kind of stuff, but also the knightly jousting, like samurai duel stuff.
Yeah, that's what I really enjoy about that too. This is often a thing that we have to figure out as authors or as creators. We have something that we want. Like we want something that is like, for instance, dueling or fighting with swords. So in Star Wars, it's like, how are we going to get sword fighting into a sci-fi setting when people can just blow each other up with blasters? It's like, well, we'll make them wizards that can block the blasters with the sword. Bam, now you need a sword, you know. Or it's just part of rituals. I remember in Dune they had a shield. They had this shield that they could wear. And in order to knife fight with the shield, you had to like slowly push the knife through the shield in order to stab somebody. There was a whole set of combat things associated with it, which I liked. And so I think with the mecha genre, you get to have that warrior ethos still there.
Definitely. And it's interesting you bring up the Holtzman shield, because my first series of Soul Cycle kind of riffs on that trope.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me about that?
I'm a big Frank Herbert fanboy, so
me too.
I stole it, man. Characters have personal shield generators, but the idea isn't that the slow blade will penetrate the shield. It's just that it's kind of like they're kind of like kinetic buffers that just slow down incoming projectiles and thrusts, so give you a little extra protection.
Yeah, I like creative things like that. I actually did that in Knights of the Old Republic right away. So the first thing you're doing when you're fighting your way out of the ship is the guy who wakes you up is like, okay, people have personal shields, which means melee weapons are going to be a factor in this war. And that's all the explanation they really need to give you for you to be like, okay, well, it's worth it for me to like hold a lightsaber or a sword because people can block some of the blaster bolts. You know, it kind of sets up the RPG rules with a very simple explanation. It's like, yeah, people have personal shields. That's why blasters don't just kill people and blow them into disintegrate them, you know?
Yeah. that gets to the heart of, and one of the major building blocks of top shelf storytelling, which is if you can solve long-standing storytelling problems in interesting ways, and in the modern era, how to make sword fights cool again is one of the number one challenges. And you see that a lot of the franchises that rise to the top come up with interesting solutions, and Gundam is one of them.
Yeah, Gundam.
Yeah.
Gundam is, yeah, I definitely have a lot of positive memories of Gundam. The thing that I remember the most is actually BattleTech, which is Western. And BattleTech originally, all of its aesthetics, so the BattleTech aesthetic, which people really like, is basically a response because they ripped off Gundam's aesthetic. And it was a problem for them initially because they had all these Gundam fighting robots, and they were worried about legal action coming from, whatever corporate owned that. So they completely redesigned their aesthetics, and it was actually a really good thing that they did that because it gave the entire BattleTech universe a much different feel from a lot of the robotic stuff that was coming out of the East. It just gave it its own personality in a way that I think wouldn't have happened if they hadn't been forced to redesign their visual approach.
So that was news to me. So thank you.
Yeah, it was.
I about the Stompy versus Spiky Mech dichotomy. That's where that came from. Huh?
Yeah, that's the Stompy versus Spiky. I like that. Why did you? Yeah, could you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it's just I didn't come up with it, but generally among the fandom, Spiky Mecha are Japanese, so stuff like Gundam or like Macross to a lesser extent, and Stompy is Western, so like MechWarrior and BattleTech.
Now I'm trying to find the cover. If I could find the cover of the original BattleTech box, I think it looks like it's just a Gundam robot. He's holding he's holding a gun, or he's holding like a gun. So their original mechs had hands. Basically a real extension of your body. It had hands rather than it's a tank that walks and has guns instead of hands, which is what it kind of evolved into.
The fuselage of like a B-2 bomber on legs.
Yeah, you're still going to find the older mechs that they did for BattleTech. I'm going to see if I could find a couple of the old images, but the older mechs still have hands. So a lot of the older mechs, they were still operating from that Eastern influence, and they gave them hands to do stuff and to hold guns. So some of them are still holding guns. And then slowly by the 1990s, you got this switch over to the Stompy mechs, to these mechs that really have just gun arms. And the arms with guns on them are just there because that's an easier way to aim a gun, I guess, than something else. Anybody that played MechWarrior, though, knows, though, this used to be a joke, is that you always loaded all of your weapons into the torso. Oh, I think I found it. Yes, I think I found it. Let's see if I can show it.
Tactic, by the way.
The 1984 one. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's overlap because, I mean, like, the main venerable bad guy mecha, if you can call it that, in Gundam is the Zaku, and Zaku is a Japanese onomatopoeia for stomping.
I like that.
Well, I do the same thing with the Grenzmarks and the Stapfins from Exeed. Those are both German onomatopoeias for like marching or stomping.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that either. Yep. Let me see if I can show this.
Yeah.
I'll show this to people. Let's see here. Gotta find my. I think it's under PowerPoint. There we go. All right, let me show this to people. You're not going to see Brian's face for a minute here, but if you look at some of these images here, you'll see this right here. This game of armored combat, and it's very small, but you can still see it. This is what the original BattleTech stuff looked like. Even though it's still pretty stompy, you have a lot of what I would consider Eastern influence, and some of it's even more Eastern-y. I think this first one is a good example. So you can see that it's very It's very much more like, it's still stompy. It has those big feet, but it has the lines of it's more human, and it still has hands instead of gun arms. It's in general a good aesthetic. Kind of what they started with. And here's you can actually see some of the Japanese versions of the BattleTech stuff. They give them a more Japanese look as well. So it's kind of interesting how those things go back and forth. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting how they go. Now, I see some people in chat saying that they don't, a couple of my regular viewers, that they're not into mech anime or anything like that. Where do you think is actually a good place to start?
If you haven't gotten into mecha anime before, okay. I actually have the starter pack worked out. So what you kind of want to do is get the 3 original Mobile Suit Gundam compilation movies that condense the first series down into nice digestible chunks. Okay, so watch that. That should give you a good intro. Then I would recommend going on to watch 0083 Stardust Memory, the OAVs from Gundam, and then after that Zeta Gundam. And if you're not hooked by then, there's just no hope for you.
Now, some people are saying Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I haven't watched since the 90s, and I don't even really remember.
That's a whole other kettle. That's actually a reaction against the mech genre, and I mean, it. Come on, that was 1995, right? It's been off since it came out, so it's not really a mecha show. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people saying I find the history of Robotech confusing. You're not the only one.
Oh man, Harmony Gold just screwed the pooch on that so bad. Funny.
Hardwick says he got my Christmas Spectacular a few days ago. It didn't strike me until I started looking through it, but I suddenly realized, my goodness, this guy's written a lot. I have not published as much as I've written. So everything that I've published, I've written, and have yet to publish the exact same amount, if not more. I have multiple books that I wrote like in 2017 and 2008, actually 2018, 2019, which I didn't publish yet because they weren't, they needed more revision, they needed more work. Corvo says Voices of the Void was awesome. Thank you for reading that. I'm glad you liked it. I had a lot of fun writing Voices of the Void, which is a good sci-fi one. No mechs in Voices of the Void. This is more like Aliens meets Lovecraft. There is a robot, but it's a very small flashhead robot, rather than giant fighting robots.
Chat brought up a good dimension of this discussion. We haven't touched on it, which is real robot versus super robot.
Oh, yeah. Explain.
Are you familiar with that dichotomy at all?
No. One's more fantasy influenced, or one?
Well, I think that Bradford Walker in chat put it best, is that it's best to think of super robot as having the same tropes as the superhero genre.
Okay.
Only the superhero is a giant robot.
Okay.
Like sometimes kaiju size, so it can be powered by like fighting spirit and will miraculously respond to the pilot's anger and like moods and stuff. Which actually came first. That's closer to what Mazinger Z is, but then Gundam really kicked off the real robot genre, where it said, hey, let's take these giant robots, and again, kind of like Eva, it was a reaction to Super Robot, an attempt to go the other way, because you had some of the same tropes, like there's a one super prototype robot that's just hands down better than anything else, and it's actually designed by the main character's dad, and through some series of circumstances, this like teenage kid ends up piloting this death machine. But then Tomino, who created Gundam, said, well, let's treat this seriously, let's play this straight and plug that into a war drama. So like one of the problem solving techniques that we talked about earlier was like, okay, why have these humanoid robots with hands that wield melee weapons? And Tomino said, well, it's because cold fusion technology relies on this new subatomic particle that was discovered called a Minovsky particle, which plays havoc with radar. So all attacks have to be guided visually. So honestly, you've got better chances getting in close.
Yeah, I like that solution too. Yeah, you can't guide a missile.
Right.
So guided missiles don't work.
Yeah, which is why if you look at the very first episode of MS Gundam, the Zaku's are using tow missiles with cables attached to them.
Yeah, I like a lot of those solutions. This is something that I generally like about Japanese stuff in general. Is I think that they are very good at constructing settings based on these what ifs. These speculative ideas. So they'll have a setting. It's like, what if it was an ocean but sand? It's like, then they just follow through with that and make a setting where the ocean is sand instead of water. It's like, what if it's this but that? What if they're here but there's 6 moons and the waves are crashing? They come up with all kinds of crazy things and actually follow through with them and do them. I feel like some of that spirit has been lost in the West, that imaginative idea for pursuing that. I do think mechs kind of work backwards because you want to have the melee fighting. So you come up with a story algebra. I do this and this, and then I could get what I want. Chat. Is there a requirement for the size of the mech in this genre? Like, would Halo Suit or Iron Man be considered a form of mecha?
Is that for me?
I mean, you can answer it.
Well, I mean, Astro Boy is considered an entry in the genre. So there's an argument to be made, but then we also get into, like you said, the Eastern versus Western filter. So, I mean, Iron Man is self-identifiedly in the superhero genre, right? But they don't go full super robot with it because Tony Stark attempts to use hand waving to explain the physics behind how the Iron Man armor works. So I think there you're just getting into just genre bashing cranked up to 11. But I do think if you, in terms of the reasonable man on the street test, I don't think so. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a line drawing fallacy.
It's kind of like saying if there's magic, does that mean you're in high fantasy? And it's like the answer is no. It's pretty similar. So I will say here's something. So we're talking about power armor, right? Now, what to me makes mecha is that the robots are larger than human size for the most part, rather than because if you're talking power armor, you can go back to like Starship Troopers for power armor.
Right.
That's kind of. I don't know if it's Patient Zero, but I think most people think of it as Patient Zero for this idea of power armor, where a person steps into some sort of armor which gives them additional powers, enhances their strength and all that kind of stuff. And that's almost ubiquitous in a lot of space opera and sci-fi settings. This is this idea of power armor, whether it's like StarCraft Marines or it's something like Iron Man. Iron Man is really power armor. It's an extension of that. I will say also, so somebody also said down here, do you think, could the Japanese mecha genre have been inspired by Stan Lee's Iron Man comics? While it is possible, I think the Japanese things predate it as far as robots go. Because I remember a Japanese black and white cartoon called The Eighth Man, which just became 8 Man. That I think was from the late 60s or from the early 60s.
You can go back to 1931 with Ogon Bat.
Okay.
Which was later adapted into an anime in 1967. So, yeah, Japanese got them beat on that one.
Yeah, so I think the Japanese thing really predates it. I mean, there's always trading. You can always trade things across the water. But I think that the Japanese with the robots is pretty early pretty early there. I just pulled up the Wikipedia for A-Man. It's like supposedly he was the inspiration for RoboCop. And if, by the way, guys, because we'll probably talk about cyberpunk in a different stream, but if you want to see a weird entry into the cyberpunk genre, you can check out an anime movie from the 90s called 8-Man After. 8-Man After takes this early 60s robot superhero and just puts him in a cyberpunk story. It's really weird to see it, but it's actually a pretty interesting little anime. So if you're fans of Gundam or like Alita, then 8-Man After is one that uses that. Yeah, and that's the other thing about the mecha genre. Otherwise, is like the cyberpunk genre mecha. Not really. To me, at least.
Yeah, you get again some line blurring with like Appleseed or Ghost in the Shell, but by and large, just because a trope from a different genre is present in another, it doesn't make the host genre into that genre.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of tropes that get shared around. Like just because you have, like in the thumbnail, just because you have a mech with a laser sword doesn't mean it's Star Wars. You know what I mean?
Right.
That I don't think that quite goes into the genre. Now, for me, the Stompy Mech stuff was really what I focused on a lot in my youth was playing BattleTech. I don't know if you played. Do you ever play BattleTech? Or they had a whole bunch of novels associated with it too. It's a great game. What's cool about BattleTech is kind of like D&D. You actually don't need to buy stuff to play it. You can play it with like quarters. We used to play it with like quarters if we didn't have miniatures and stuff. You really don't have to buy anything to play BattleTech. It's a really simple rule set as well, and very easy to execute. You can play it in the sandbox. You can do rules light with your kids sometime if you want to. Get them to count and strategize and think about probabilities, like a lot of the wargaming stuff from the 60s through 80s. So it's a good game. I played it a lot in my youth, and they had all of these novels that went with it. And I don't know, somewhere along the way, FASA was the company that was running it. They went under, got bought, and like the whole thing kind of disappeared off the radar. Like back in I want to say the late 90s, early 2000s. I think it's made a little resurgence, but I haven't played any of the new games. Have you?
No, I have not.
Yeah, but the tabletop game is definitely a fun one to play, and I'd recommend it for people who want to just try a mecha-inspired wargaming option. A lot of fun to play that. FASA got bought by Microsoft? Really? From the chat. I didn't know that. Now, there's also the BattleTech video games. So the one I remember a lot was one, I think it was 1994 or 1995. It was MechWarrior 2. So if I think you can get that. I think it's abandonware now. MechWarrior 2 I spent a lot of time playing, and I really enjoyed it a lot. It's one of the things that kind of got me into PC gaming, I guess.
Yeah, the few times I've played MechWarrior and BattleTech games, I've loved them. The one video game I played was on the original Xbox.
Oh, I'm trying to remember which one that was. I don't think I played it. MechWarrior 2 was such a big PC game at the time. Like, PC gaming has always been a little bit. I mean, back then it was weird. Now you could play all the console games on PC. Like, they all come out on PC now. You could play Final Fantasy on your PC, which is weird now. But back then, PC games were really different, and so your PC was like orders of magnitude more powerful than like a Super Nintendo. You had 3D graphics, which were very new at the time, and huge maps. So when you played MechWarrior, it also used like every key on the keyboard, And so when you played it, you really felt like I'm in a giant robot having to memorize all of these controls, and it was so complicated sometimes to play the game. There was so much to it that it really, I don't know, had an inspirational feel, like you were actually a pilot in a mech. There's also one I remember from the Xbox days that had a giant controller. Does anyone remember what that one was? It came with this huge giant controller you had to set up that was like a cockpit for a mech, and I don't remember the name of it right now. Gunbuster is also awesome. That's from the chat. Probably a bit more obscure due to never receiving an English dub. Yeah, I haven't heard of it, but I prefer subtitles anyway. That's me.
Same here.
Yeah.
Good man.
MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries from Christopher was also great. Yeah, that was a really... It was... After MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries, it felt like we were waiting years and years for MechWarrior 3 to come out, but I think at the time it was only like 2 years. And MechWarrior 3 came out and we're like, this game's not as good. Like, it looked pretty, but it wasn't nearly as fun to play. It wasn't... It's like they tried to go with a more action arcade kind of feel rather than a real mech simulation. Yeah, I felt like the magic was lost.
Yeah, you're giving me another window into another world here because I'm going to be honest. Like, growing up, I didn't get, like, my first real Series PC until I was 18.
Yeah, that's common.
Yeah, so I'm a console gamer. I still have my original NES and SNES hooked up in the other room. So I'm really only now getting around to going back and checking out the PC games I missed. So I have to look into MechWarrior and BattleTech. Are there any you'd recommend?
Yeah.
So go and give it. What's the entry point?
Yeah, MechWarrior. So if you want to play older school PC mech games, I think MechWarrior 2 is either MechWarrior 2 or MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries. I think MechWarrior 2 is probably better to start with. They're both abandonware, so you can play them for free now. Activision hasn't kept them up. You can run them through DOSBox. I went back and played them a while back, and they still kind of hold up. They're a little clunky, and the controls don't feel as visceral as they do now. It kind of feels like you're driving a tank, and not so much like you're in a mobile suit robot. But they're still pretty good. I haven't played a lot of the newer ones, and as far as I know, there's not a really good PC translation of the tabletop game. So the tabletop game is probably a cool place to start if you like tabletop gaming, if you like wargaming or strategy gaming.
Yeah, the couple of games I did play the tabletop version were just good fun, so I can definitely co-sign that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good one to play, and it's really cheap to get into. It could be expensive depending on how you approach it, because I knew guys that they paid a lot of money for little miniatures, and they painted the miniatures. So if you want to go that route, if you're into having that, you could definitely amass like a pretty cool collection of mechs. If you just want to play with, you can make anything into a mech. Like I said, we used to play with quarters and rocks. So we put a bunch of rocks in the sandbox, and we're all in some dirt somewhere, and then we use coins in our pockets, and we just knew how to play it. And I don't know, that's kind of an old school approach to gaming. It was the same thing with Dungeons and Dragons, is that we played without maps. Like, people are like, where's your map? It's like, map? You don't need a map to play D&D. What are you talking about? You just adventure.
Big mood. Big mood, sir. I've been there. I've used pennies to simulate cannon fodder on a hex map before.
Yeah, and I think it works great. So you can just do that. It's a great entry place if you're looking to do that. I don't know where to start with, say, the novels, because it's been so long since I had any interaction with them. But the lore is very deep. It's got its own really cool lore. And we were talking about warriors. One of the things I like about BattleTech as a universe is that I think especially when you have these like the clans, you have this focus on the warrior within actually piloting it being the valuable thing, not the tech per se. If that makes any sense. I like that warrior ethos. That's what made the clans such an interesting part of that setting.
Yeah, the idea that, we can build another one of these, or it might even be mass-produced, and while they're expensive, it's still peanuts compared to the cost of raising up and training an expert pilot. Yeah.
Fantasy Fan, it's a cool coincidence you're covering the mech genre. Just today I was made aware of a mech franchise I was previously unaware of, Pat Labor.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not aware of that one either.
That one's a classic.
Hardwick, is there anything in the mecha genre that features mech suits that look like Art Deco robots, such as those in Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow?
Someone mentioned Big O. I think it's definitely got the Bruce Timm Paul Dini Batman the Animated Series vibe going on. And it was kind of a dark horse come from behind series that was belatedly embraced by the mech fandom because much like Transformers, it started out as a way to sell toys,
Hmm.
but then so they aired it on Adult Swim. I believe it was originally produced for American television, and they just let them do whatever they wanted with it. So they just went all Phil K. Dick deep, like you too are a tomato, and their Conan the Barbarian references. It's a great fun show, and it's got that kind of industrial deco aesthetic to it.
Well, that's cool. I'm actually reminded of a mech fight in a series that was based on the Count of Monte Cristo, and I'm trying to remember the name of the series.
Oh, nice.
It starts with a G. Gengetsuo or something. It's this weird anime series, and they, instead of having a duel like they would normally, like you pull out your small sword if you were actually in the time of the Count of Monte Cristo. But instead of pulling out their small sword, they get in their mechs and do battle. It's great. So Japanese, I love it. Gengetsuo, that's it. Gengetsuo is a weird adaptation of the Count of Monte Cristo. There's been all kinds of adaptations. This is when it takes place in a future, and the Count of Monte Cristo has like an alien symbiote from deep space, and he's like on a path of revenge. It's really weird. Gengetsu is it? Yeah, I watched it a while back, and I remember this duel with the mechs. It was just, I'm like, oh, makes total sense. They're gonna fight in their robots. Because it's the gentlemanly thing to do, is to fight in your giant robot.
A society with mechs is a polite society.
Yeah. Like, imagine that. It's like it kind of makes sense, because you're a little bit protected in the mech. You have something online. You have something that's valuable. Like if you lose your mech, that's a large financial investment. It tests your warrior mettle and your skill because the suit is an extension of you. That's the main thing I like about Mecha Genre, is that the suit is an extension of you, which makes it more visceral, more just a tighter focus on the physical actions.
It increases the immediacy, and it's very salutary to bring that up because I get into that in CY 40 Second Coming. I hinted at it in the previous book, Coalition Year 40, but yeah, we just get to see full-on like BCI and full immersion type stuff start to crop up in this book.
Cool. Yeah, why don't you tell us about your book a little bit?
Okay, great. Yeah, so the Exeed franchise as a whole can be thought of as Tom Clancy meets Mobile Suit Gundam, because for all the tropes that we talk about with both the Eastern and Western mecha genres, they've both kind of hit dead ends in the last few years. So somebody brought up Evangelion. I believe it was JD Countess said it's the Watchmen of mecha. Yeah, fully agree. Even though I like Eva, but it's a deconstruction, and what you've had since the late 90s in spiky mecha is everything's got to either be the latest Neo Xeon War in Gundam, or it's got to be an Eva clone, and that's really it. And then in the West, we've really descended into just the Space Marine sepia-toned meat grinder. So I'm trying to kind of reconcile both those genres, like taking the tropes that work and are cool or exciting, and trying to sort of rehabilitate those stale tropes in new and interesting ways. And don't have to take my word for it. If you look at the reviews on Amazon, readers are picking up on that and saying, yeah, Brian succeeded. This is the best mecha anime you've never seen.
I like that. That's a great log line right there.
Thanks. And just plot-wise, it's pretty simple. I just take the various economic and social environmental crises that are besetting us now, just send them forward a couple hundred years on a straight line, and what you have is the elites fleeing the Earth to man-made space colonies to escape the collapse below, then eventually thinking, wow, I wonder what happened to our former kinsmen down on Earth. Let's go check on them. Oh, good lord! Like they're they're barbarians. They don't even they don't have iPods anymore. We've got to help them. And the people on Earth will be like, meddling aliens are here to establish a global nanny state. And the returning colonists get giant mecha involved, and it just escalates from there. So in the second book, you've got this new generation of Earthlings who have grown up knowing nothing about this repressive regime, but hearing that people used to be free, and starting a partisan insurgency against this coalition that's more powerful than all existing Earth governments combined, and setting out to take them down through asymmetrical means. And then they find giant death machines, and it gets interesting. And then the third book completes that story arc.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
I'm glad you.
Yeah, I like that. Someone says Pacific Rim is explicitly a mecha entry. Any thoughts on Pacific Rim?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's the EVA movie we need, if not the EVA movie we deserve.
Well, I like about that one because it's got the kaiju element in it.
Yeah.
And I like the kaiju element because that really brings up the scale, and also makes it, again, that visceral kind of fighting. I don't know if people are watching or into like the kaiju genre and stuff. It's kind of, I don't know, it kind of became a kids thing at one point. It was like Godzilla and giant fighting monsters. But I kind of like the crossovers when you have they did it a couple times in Godzilla movies. They had like Mecha Godzilla. You know, in the 80s they had another one that was like a flying robot mech that they built to fight the Godzilla monsters, to fight the kaijus. And I think Pacific Rim is just the next, you know, it's just a more complex modern take on like Godzilla versus Space Godzilla. Just basically a lot like that. Like, we're going to build a giant robot to fight the giant monster.
They realize it's a Roots and Super Robot, where often the Super Robot would be fighting giant creatures and kaiju, not just other mecha. So there's precedent.
Xenoblade Chronicles X had such fun mecha RPG combat. I have Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Wii U, but I've never played it. I bought it basically on a recommendation, and then I just didn't get around to playing it because I don't get to play that many games these days. You know, I'm pretty busy. Outlaw Star goes to the edge of being a mecha, but stops just short of the genre, in my opinion. Probably would be considered mecha if the grappler ships were just a bit more prominent.
Yeah, I co-sign that.
Yeah, that's probably accurate. Outlaw Star is close to mecha, but not quite. It's space western with Trigun and Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah, it's interesting because people accuse me of ripping off Outlaw Star for the Soul Cycle, but I wrote the first book in it before I ever saw Outlaw Star. So it's just a case of convergent design.
Yeah, that happens. I mean, there's also these things, they go and they come back again. Just, I was thinking about Star Wars, right? Star Wars has mecha in it. You know, the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, there's these big four-legged walking robots. You know, that they tie their legs up. That's how they defeat them.
Courtesy of the late, great Sid Mead. Chat, can we get an F in chat for Sid Mead? Legendary designer of Blade Runner.
Oh, yes.
Gundam.
He died recently.
Yeah.
This is something, just as an aside, people often criticize, and it's not an invalid criticism, so don't take this as me like being upset about it. They criticize how much weight I give to visual design when I'm reviewing sci-fi movies or fantasy movies. And I feel like in a lot of cases I'm not giving the aesthetics enough credit for how much work they do. Blade Runner is a really good example. Blade Runner would not be a movie that is remembered if it did not have the visual design and the approach to cinematography that it has. The visuals, it's like a necessary condition You know, it's not a sufficient condition for a good movie, but it's necessary for high concept sci-fi movies like this kind of stuff. It really is. People would not know what Star Wars was if it weren't for Ralph McQuarrie in a story.
Yeah.
No one would know it. It's the visual design is what pulls people into the story. It's a good story, so people stick around because they care about the story. But those visual design and that aesthetics, that really matters.
Yeah, and I've got to cut in here. I would be remiss not to mention that God has blessed me with the finest concept artist I could have asked for in the form of Ardenon. So I got to give him a shout out. I don't think it'll let me post links.
If you post it, I can approve it. If you try it real quick, it'll just hold it and I'll approve it. There might be a slight delay.
He's brought my readers' visions to life.
Or send it to me on Twitter and I'll just copy it in.
Okay.
Yeah, visual design is huge, and I mean that's also something that's important to note about comics. So there's often this debate in comics, like, you know, who's more important, the writer or the artist? I'm like, well, it's a visual medium, so the art's really important. Like, you wouldn't read a bad story. I mean, you wouldn't read a good story with bad art because the bad art just wouldn't pull you into it. You gotta have both. Good art you might look at, but you're not gonna look at bad art to access a good story. It just doesn't really happen. So it's worth your time to have the good art.
Yeah, like the book cover, the Christmas anthology just showed us. That's simple, effective, doesn't overstate itself, gets a point across.
Yeah, I made this one night because I don't know, I just had this thing. I'm like, I'm gonna put all my books in a giant book. It'll be fun. And so I did a little cover design for it. It's just a bunch of snowflakes in the shape of a dragon, and it was completely assembled. I didn't really do much to it, and then just like designed the book cover. It's pretty simple, but it's one of my least complex cover designs. Yeah. It's kind of funny. My most complex cover designs, people don't even realize like what's actually going into them. Yeah. So, like City of Silver, this is my last fantasy book. This is a cool book. So, nothing. It's like, how'd you what'd you do with this cover art? It's like, this moon is not a moon. It's like a planet. All the clouds are fake. I put all those in. The buildings don't go together. The people are copy pasted. The lighting isn't. Nothing on this cover like was just there. This one's even crazier. The third Needle Ash one. It's a landscape that I crafted out of stock photos, like layers of stock photos to make it look like this, and it looks really cool. And it has that humanizing element, but I spent more time like making a fantasy background out of stock photos. But nobody notices the background. They're just like, oh, it looks like some cool fantasy area. Like it's,
Yeah.
There's actually this is actually a mirror image and alteration of a famous castle in Aragon, I think, in Spain. So
it's one. You do your own covers there. I got to give it a shout out to my cover artist, Todd Everhart.
Yeah.
As well. But yeah. Good job, man.
Yeah, so somebody says there's really good manga with kind of bad art. Bad art will disrupt the flow of what you're doing, though. If you're going to do a comic, try to get a good artist on your site.
Yeah, comics are a visual medium.
Same thing with movies. People say I rate the aesthetics too high. I'm like, I could see them being higher. I could see them. They're weighted about a third. I mean, not even a third. It's like a third of the production, 1/3 to 1/2 of the production score, which is 1/3 of the score. So really, you're looking at like 15% of the score is bound up in the visual design. It could be more. You could weight that more heavily because it's a pretty necessary condition, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
This is just my opinion there. So yes, anyone that's a prospective author, good cover design is very important. I think it's very important. And with the mecha genre, I mean, would you say that the design of the mechs is a pretty important part of enjoying it? Of why people like it?
We can look at chat right now and see the chat just happily chatting away about their favorite mecha designs. It's especially for Real Robot, it's a key part of the formula. So one thing I did with Ardenon Sulp was I went and created like Jane's defense style entries for all of the combat frames and combat frame Exeed. So you can actually look up the nuts and bolts stats on them. And people just love it. It really helps with audience engagement. I just send it to you on Twitter if you want to show folks. I even get down to like how many kilograms of thrust their rockets provide and what caliber their weapons are.
Yeah, this is one of the things, by the way, I really loved about BattleTech, is they had all of this. They had all this stuff on it. You know, this mech weighs 75 tons. It has room for this much stuff. It has an engine that's like this, and that was always really fun to look at and really fun to think about. And different mechs had different different strengths and weaknesses to them, different capabilities. So you had, and people who are into BattleTech, they remember like all the different names of all the different mechs. There's a really iconic one called the Timberwolf, which has been on like half of the BattleTech covers because of the way it looks. It looks kind of like a really much cooler looking AT-ST Walker, I guess, from Star Wars. I really, really liked the way that they did all this. So yeah, let's look at one here for technical data. CF02, the Grenz Mark 1.
Yeah, that's one of the stompy mechs.
Nicknamed Thimblehead. This looks like a BattleTech mech, yeah. Manufacturer Exeed Corporation. See, I like this.
Yeah, glad you like it. And those model number designations actually mean something. I've got a key that shows what each letter and number refers to. So it's not random alphabet soup.
Okay. That's good. That it adds an extra dimension to it. Reminds me of, I read Lord of the Rings to my wife and my kid, back when I had one kid. And she's like, it's like you could tell that Tolkien really thought about every detail in this world. Everything has a name. It's not just a random river. Every river has a name. So when you have that level of depth to a universe, I think it really draws you in as a reader. Makes it feel more real.
Yeah, and as a writer, this what you're showing right now really has helped me write the series because it makes a great background reference. Like, so if I'm doing a mech fight and I'm thinking, okay, well, what would this guy do here? What can he do? I just go to my blog and look up, okay, well, yeah, this one has these weapons, this one is this fast, and it helps me choreograph the fights.
Oh, super chat from Daniel Bull. Thank you. I just started rewatching Gundam the other day. Then there's this stream. The planets must be aligning. Maybe they are. But I'm not a believer in astrology. But I'm also not a big believer in coincidences.
Well, it's called Providence.
Yeah. Chuck Wendig thinks Tolkien sucks. Well, Chuck sucks.
Yeah, Wendig.
Chuck Wendig sucks. What has he done that is good? Yeah, Didn't he write like a comic 100 years ago that some people liked?
One thing he wrote that I recently stumbled upon was the slasher supplement for World of Darkness, and it's really, really heavy on lame Writer's Workshop style flavor text and really light on actual nuts and bolts rules. And man, I gotta wade through like this journal entry in order to get to the mechanic I want. Right, thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, thank you for the super chat though. Yeah, I don't. Now we're talking about Chuck. Chuck, I don't know. He got fired by Disney. I remember this. Like they had him doing something. He got fired from Marvel, I think, because he talks on Twitter too much. So. That's the main thing I remember him from. I don't think I've ever actually read anything by Chuck. I just think he's a bad personality. You can always count on him for bad Twitter takes.
Yeah.
So
Twitter's resident axe wielding hobo.
let's see. I missed some chat stuff. When you think about it, the Terminator is the opposite of Mecha. It's a robot in a human suit instead of the other way around. I like that. It's true.
That's mind blowing.
I'm trying to think if there's something similar to that. See, and when I think of robots, I have to go all the way back to like Metropolis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a film everyone should probably watch. Is Metropolis.
Concur.
Very classic and weirdly, I don't know, definitely influential. I don't know. I'm not going to say it's like necessarily prescient, but it's a really interesting, like very big seeds for many ideas. Any plans for me to write a mecha sci-fi book? I don't know. You know, I'm not sure. If I did, it would probably be more like BattleTech, in the sense that what interested me about BattleTech wasn't just that the robots are interesting. It's that there was a whole crazy big, like, what does a galactic society look like? You know, you don't see a really highly detailed galactic society very often in fiction. It's usually pretty simplified. It's like, there's a galactic republic. I'm like, why?
Yeah, a series that my fellow mech author Bradford Walker in chat mentioned is Docky E. Smith's Lensman series.
The Lensman series.
Lensman, yeah, from the Big Bad Pulp days. And he was actually a doctor of electrical engineering. So he tried to, basically do the real robot approach. Where he's like, okay, I'm going to make everything in these books explicable by the laws of physics as much as possible. And he also took that approach to the society. Like, okay, how would you hold like a galactic republic together? And the idea he came up with was the Lensmen, which are the police force of the galactic civilization, and they're given these lenses that give them way cool mind powers, and kind of bridge the communications gap between all these vastly different alien species. So it's basically to solve the problem of, okay, in a galactic civilization, what keeps you from committing a murder on one planet and then going hundreds of light years away and going to ground on a different planet among like a totally different species where no one knows you and you just deny everything? So I'm not really doing it justice, but yeah, Lensman. I was the inspiration for Green Lantern.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Highly recommended.
Oh, I guess Chuck Wendig got fired from Darth Vader Marvel Comics. I don't care about Darth Vader comics. So, no big loss. I'm sure if he was a good writer, it was no big loss for me. Thoughts on Toshihiko Sahashi? Sahashi. He's the one who did the music for some of the Gundam series.
Oh, did he do Unicorn?
I think he did Unicorn. Did he?
Okay,
I just looked it up. I don't think so. He did Gunslinger Girl, which I like the music from that, but I didn't really like the show. Mobile Suit Gundam, Seed. I remember these. Yeah, I liked the music from him. Yeah, he's been around a long time.
I did some Eva. Okay. Oh yeah, he's solid.
Yeah. Let me see if there's something I remember like really clearly.
Oh, Outlaw Star too. Okay.
He's a good player. There's lots of, this is another thing about Japanese music. Japanese music tends to preserve Western music better than the West has.
Right? Like, especially Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, they are nuts for it over there.
They love classical music, and they do their own music in the tradition of, the what we call common practice, which is the music that runs up to the 20th century. And it's great. This is why a lot of anime movies just have really stellar soundtracks with orchestras. And I did some content a while back, like why movie scores seem to suck. And part of my conclusion is that most Western music students are not taught the Western tradition properly. Like most people who have composition degrees, and I speak as somebody who has a composition degree, music composition degree. Most of them don't really know how to compose music. And that's because of the postmodern influence, which I think you and I have talked about, if not on the stream, certainly in chat. This idea We can make our own aesthetics. The Japanese don't approach it that way. It's more like it's more a linear progression. There's a lot more love of what came before, I feel like. But yeah, I feel like they've produced better classical music than the West has for a long time.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think that's also why we tend to remember, especially those game soundtracks from the early console days, like the Super Nintendo games, the NES games. We have such fond memories of those because they were just well composed pieces of music. They were actually melodic, and we heard them a lot, and we didn't get tired of them. And if you compare that to a lot of the stuff coming out of the West, it's just not, the video game stuff's more melodic. It's more memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been speaking of PC gaming. I just now got onto playing Nier Automata, and man, what really struck me. Yeah, you too.
It's a great game.
Yeah, the music just slapped me in the face. I mean, in a good way. It's like, wow, remember when video games had soundtracks that like you'd find yourself humming while you're driving later?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them still do. A lot of them still have great soundtracks. So a lot of the Japanese games, I really enjoyed the soundtrack to Nier Automata. I thought the game was great too. Very interesting game. There's even mecha sections in it. The game opens up with you flying your mechs into battle, and they get all blown up except for you. Yeah,
it seamlessly transitions between the mecha and RPG and beat 'em up genres. That takes real talent. Taro really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. You can also play the original Nier game for PS3. It's a weird. They're both weird games. Nier is more just straight like fantasy, but it does the same thing. Yeah. Like you just move to a side-scrolling section, and it just kind of moves between these different gameplay modes in a very, very fluid way. And that's what.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask if you played Drakengard, which is a direct prequel to Nier.
I haven't played that one. No. In fact, I should probably get deeper into the whole series because it's kind of like the Xeno series games. Each of them is a different iteration on like a core idea that's in there. So the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was the one that came out on the Switch. That's a fun little action RPG. Xenoblade Chronicles X has mecha stuff in it. That one's for the Wii U, but I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, with Drakengard and Nier, the connection is a little more convoluted, but it's basically Nier results from one of the bad endings of Drakengard and picks it up from there.
I love that idea.
Yeah, and then I think Nier Automata follows from one of the endings of Nier, but I haven't finished Nier yet, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, it's good, and there's actually the endings deal a lot with, I think, core sci-fi questions. So if you go to classic sci-fi, and I always have to say classic sci-fi now because it feels like the sci-fi genre now, it's like romances in space or something. Like lesbian romances in space is like the at least as far as the big pub. We're NewPub. Me and Brian are NewPub guys. We don't do this like let me pay an agent and a publisher to not promote my book. But classic sci-fi like Philip K. Dick and just everyone else probably. It feels like in 1980 there was something happened in 1980 where like all the sci-fi went away. I don't know what happened.
Have you talked to my buddy Jeffro Johnson?
I probably not about this.
I would have him on, especially for this. He wrote Appendix N. It explains everything.
I think we've talked about some of this stuff, but yeah, for some reason about 1980, all the sci-fi. I don't know what happened. There were no more. I can't think of any sci-fi stories after 1980, except maybe Ender's Game that I thought were even worth reading.
And look what they're doing to card now. Yeah, basically, it was on purpose. What happened was, for decades, you had frustrated litfic authors because there were more aspiring litfic authors than there was market for litfic. but they got connections in the New York old pub scene, so the publishers gave them sinecures as editors, and then these frustrated litfic authors are like, well, now I'm the editor in charge of this venerable sci-fi magazine, and so I will now only accept stories that are basically like sad polar bears in space. That's what happened.
But yeah, just to finish my point, it has a lot of those points that like Philip K. Dick would make about what's the nature of humanity. You know, robots with feelings. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have empathy? Those sorts of things are kind of embedded in those endings in some really interesting ways. So it's a great game to finish up. Yeah, on the sci-fi train though, someone says in chat, and this is a really good point, and I want to talk about it. Star Wars and Star Trek happened. I kind of want to rebut this. I'll let Brian rebut it first.
Yeah, no, actually, Star Wars brought back science fiction, which had been dominant in the era of the pulps from about the 19 teens up until 1937. And what Lucas did was he made an end run around these dreary message fic pushing New York editors and did his own Flash Gordon, basically. And people remembered, oh, wow, themes of clear good versus evil, and space princesses, and
cool blasters and ships, and the whole bit.
Robots.
So this is a really good point. Now, I don't either 101 Prime. I don't think you're not wrong. Star Wars and Star Trek happened, right. But I think that people started to get more interested. And here's the thing: a lot of these people who are litfic authors, these people who think they're I don't know, hoity-toity, they look down their nose upon Star Wars. Anything that's popular is automatically not worth consuming, is kind of what it's like. So the 80s were full of pulp, like a return to pulp greatness in a way, just in a way that people didn't really see, especially in like the fantasy genres. You had an explosion of fantasy stuff, like with Dragonlance, and it exploded in a big way. Same thing with space opera and sci-fi. I could probably say, Star Trek had been a 1960s thing, and it was a great show. Star Wars kind of helped bring it back because people started to believe, wait, people want to see actual like spaceships and stuff. And then they brought back Star Trek. There was a big letter writing campaign, and then they even made a movie that people didn't like from Star Trek. That first Star Trek movie is usually pretty panned. They still made another one, and that one finally took. And I don't think it's any mistake that the Wrath of Khan, the more space opera-y of at least the first two Star Trek movies, is the one that really stuck and people really love. The human drama. I remember
the name of the screenwriter on Wrath of Khan, because there's a story. Okay, I think Harvey Bennett. Yeah,
Harvey Bennett. Yeah.
Seen Star Trek before when he got the gig to write Wrath of Khan. So he went to the studio, got a bunch of the original tapes of the original series, and sat down, just started watching it. And he was looking for a departure point and found this episode, Space Seed, which featured this character, Khan. He's like, okay, that's it. I'm going to do Moby Dick in space with Khan as Ahab. And so he harkened back to the classics, and it is in contrast to Star Trek the Motion Picture, which is Campbellian big men with screwdrivers SF par excellence. It's just, like Red Letter Media says, it's a sci-fi movie where you can leave in the middle, go get your tires rotated, get a haircut, go to the bank, come back, and you've missed nothing. Right? Wrath of Khan is punchy, it's pulpy, it's space opera, it's submarine warfare in space. It's beautiful.
Yeah, Hardwick says, I think part of the why Star Wars and Superman, the movie, were such big hits is people were getting tired of the grim nihilism of 70s cinema. Yeah, and there's a cycle. There's actually a little cycle you can look at. In the 60s, cinema was kind of in the same kind of phase that we're in now with cinema, where it was all gimmicks and, Space Invader movies and 3D movies, and there's real feeling that like people had this option at home called TV, and they didn't need to go to the cinema anymore. And you had this era of auteur filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola and who's the guy who did Chinatown? He's a kid diddler.
Oh, Polanski.
Roman Polanski. And it's like, dude, this video is demonetized. Yeah, you had all these auteurs that made these a lot of good films in the 70s. The Godfather's a very good film, and I actually don't think The Godfather's nihilistic, but it has a tone that is similar to that. And it's no accident that the auteurs which were influenced by nihilistic thought made nihilistic movies that made people depressed. People were happy to have anything that would be different from that. There were still good pulp movies in the 70s, though. I don't want to write off the 70s as pure nihilism. That's kind of our time filtering, simplifying things, you know?
Yeah.
I think this is pretty far afield from the mecha genre, but I think one of my favorite 70s, I think it was from the 70s. I'm going to check. From not just... It was a really fun... really fun movie called Logan's Run.
Yeah.
And what a cool sci-fi movie to exist in all that other stuff.
And they keep talking about remaking it like every
couple years.
Yeah.
1976. It came out a year before Star Wars. It was
and
cool.
It was written in 1967.
Yeah, it was written. You're right, 1967. So it was cool. What a cool. There was definitely still cool stuff in the 70s, guys. It's just this feeling that like the industry was handed over to auteurs who then, a lot of them actually really, after Star Wars started to make these pictures which bombed. There was one with Christopher Lambert. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was like a crime movie. It was like a 3-hour disaster of a movie. Made by the same guy who did Deer Hunter, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I'll look it up.
Yeah, and don't forget that in the 70s, you had a pretty burgeoning indie scene. I mean, Lucas started out as an indie director, and then in New York, you could get a loan from the mob to make any kind of movie you wanted.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and the mob, speaking of New York and the mob, they also controlled the pornography industry for a long time. And the 70s had like a period of porno chic where like regular theaters would show porn movies that you could go to. Really weird to look back and think about it now. Michael Cimino is the guy who did The Deer Hunter, and he did... I'm trying to remember the name of the movie he did. I watched it, and it wasn't that bad, but it took him like forever to make this movie, and it was terrible. I think it was The Sicilian. Was that it? Yeah, The Sicilian with Christopher Lambert as a Sicilian. That doesn't make any sense, but anyway, it was a big bomb. And so by the 80s, it was, you know, this idea that you're just going to have a director do whatever he wants. We've learned that lesson recently too. It's even worse if you give a director carte blanche over an entry into a series.
Oh, yeah.
You get Last Jedi or something like that.
I've always said that somebody should take George Lucas and lock him up in a cell with Dan Aykroyd, because they're the two best idea men in the business, and just give them unlimited, like college-ruled yellow notepads and pencils with a slot in the door for meals to go in and scripts to come out. And the next door, you've got an all-star team of editors to just make sense of it and shape the stream of consciousness stuff and references into coherent stories.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that worked really good about George Lucas's workflow with the original trilogy and why it was a success is he had these big ideas, and then they get kind of distilled through experts of their craft, like great directors and screenwriters who turn them into the final product, the idea of the final product that ends up being so good. And it's my understanding George Lucas originally did not want to direct The Phantom Menace. He wanted Steven Spielberg to do it, but he just, I don't know, felt like he needed to do it.
Well, and there's Directors Guild rules and stuff.
Oh, yeah, true. Do you think the mech genre is more niche than dinos? From Kaku, thank you for the super chat. Do You think it's more niche than dinos? Like dinosaurs?
Well, I mean, dinosaurs are fake, so no.
I don't think it's more niche than dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, I'm not aware of like a dinosaur genre. Like I know Jurassic Park movies exist.
Although we should be. I mean, man, why isn't there a dinosaur genre? That'd be awesome.
Well, if I'm gonna speaking of '80s toys, I'm gonna show you a picture here of I had these toys in the '80s. We've talked about toys in the '80s. The Dino Riders toys. Do you guys remember Dino Riders? None of you probably do.
I do.
I had these Dino Riders toys. They were just ridiculous. Not really mecha or anything, but yeah, you had guys that rode along on properly scaled dinosaurs that shot lasers. That was Dino Riders. It was just crazy. And they designed all the toys, and then they made a show that went with it. And I had the videotape of the show. It was pretty okay, actually. It really wasn't bad. It had like a story about them crash landing on a dinosaur world.
Oh wow!
It was basically like Transformers but dinosaurs. Like they crash land on the dinosaur world. They have to work with the dinosaurs to fight the bad guys. The bad guys have to enslave the dinosaurs. The good guys can convince the dinosaurs to work with them by being nice somehow. Oh boy, this looks like an internet story. The toy franchise Dino Riders may be heading to the big screen. Oh, if they made a Dino Riders movie, that would be so stupid. But
we'll get around to making everything at some point.
Yeah. All right, I'm looking at the time here, and we're starting to get a little bit over the hour because we started a little bit late. Let me go ahead and start to draw this to a close. Let's make sure that Brian has a mecha novel out, and you guys should definitely check it out. And the 42nd Coming is actually part 2, right?
3.
It's part 3. Okay.
So we've got a complete story arc. I'm going to be starting another story arc, kind of doing the Galaxy's Edge thing, called Comet Frame Exeed S. But right now, you can get a complete story, 3X, beginning, middle, and end with Comet Frame Exeed, Cold Junior 40, and Cold Junior 42nd Coming.
Okay, I'm going to link the first one too.
Thanks.
So you can check those out. Is there anything else you want to say about those?
Yeah, Mecha is back. So dive right in. There's not just me. There's my good friend and colleague Bradford Walker. There's Raul Nyanzi. A lot of guys are dipping their toes into the mech waters. So yeah, the water is fine. Jump on in. And David, you should definitely do a mech book.
Oh, we'll see. I'm not sure what I've got. I have to publish all these books I got in my back catalog. I got to get them out. So that's going to take up the first half of 2020. I'll tell you what you can look forward to for me, which is Moonsong Part 2. So if you like the first Moonsong, where is it? Part 2. That's probably next. I'm going to write a Voices of the Void sequel. So if you like Voices of the Void, there's going to be a Part 2. It's going to really expand what's going on in this universe. It's going to be a little bit of a bigger scale here. So you'll have a little bit stronger idea of where this horror franchise is going to go. So Voices of the Void Part 2, and then there'll be a Moonsong Part 2, probably Part 3, probably Part 4 maybe this year. And then, of course, Eternal Dream 3 will be coming out at some point this year. That is... Needle Ash, this is number 2. You can actually get the first one in the series by getting on my mailing list, dbspress.com/list. It's called Water of Awakening. You can get the ebook for that. People really like that. It's classic fantasy, sword and sorcery stuff, but also there's some philosophy in it. What else you got planned for 2020, Brian?
Well, what I'm going to do next is shift gears and actually get into nonfiction. Ooh. And the first planned book that I have is going to be called Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You, where I will be exploring some of the concepts we've talked about, David, with the corporate IP death cycle, but also just about how, yeah, if you thought the 70s were bad, I mean, now it's obvious to anyone paying attention that Hollywood has been hijacked by a fanatical cabal of death cultists who just hate you. So
So
I had to
that'll be
laugh.
good.
Yeah.
I will probably also have a nonfiction, at least one nonfiction book coming out this year. I might put one out with my brother-in-law on general creativity. I have another one that's going to be a short one that I'm going to put out on general creativity, and then I'll have a story writing manual. Basically, all the lectures from the Storycraft series and the Write Stream, I'm going to collect that information and put it into, hopefully, an appropriately length book. I don't want to like go overboard and have like a 900-page story writing manual. That's no point to that. And
Right.
I kind of want to do that because one of the things I feel like, and you're an editor, so you may share this opinion, but I think creative writing programs do not teach the things which you actually need to know to write a book. They have you read a book and talk about the themes of it and not how it was constructed. So 1984 is a great book, but it's not great just because there's cool ideas in it. So if you go to a literature class, you're just going to talk about cool ideas, and it's like, no, it's great because it's a great story with great characters and great plot and a great setting, and he executes the story really well. That's what you should look at if you want to make your own 1984, is how this story was written, and that's really what this book's going to focus on.
Yeah, it's thank you. That's a public service. It's going to make my job easier. My clients can tell you that. Yeah, it's not ideas, it's the execution. That's why you and I can both agree that the most frequent, but also kind of the most frustrating question we get is, where do you come up with all your ideas? I'm like, well, there are ideas everywhere, but the question is, how do you develop the skills and diligence to execute them well?
Yeah, that's the hard part. Yeah, it's all about execution. And it's kind of funny when I was doing the screenwriting thing, people would call me up and be like, I have this idea for a screenplay. It's like, then write it. It's like, well, I don't know how to write. It's like, the ideas are cheap, man. It's making something that's good is hard. It's hard to execute it. So that's really what I want to talk about. And this will be a multi-format one. I might do one that's more focused on like books, but I think those already exist. So this will be, general story writing, setting characters, plot. How do you format your story? What kind of character archetypes do you want to include? How do you make a character likable? How do you make a character hated? Things like that.
Yep, the 3 sliders, what I call that.
Tell me about
cheeseburgers. Yeah. It's a concept that I got from Brandon Sanderson, I believe, which is there are 3 sliders. Think of it as sliders on a mixing board where you can dial the levels up and down on these 3 character traits that determine likability. So first is initiative. How much does your protagonist protag? If he is actively seen to be pursuing a goal, people will just naturally root for him. Okay? 2 is how much other characters like him, kind of a manufactured social proof, if you will. So if other characters consider your MC a sleaze bag and a ne'er-do-well, readers are going to be less inclined to like him. And then finally, competence, which is how good is your character at what he does. So if you look at Indiana Jones, especially Raiders of the Lost Ark, everybody forgets that Indy's competence is actually pretty low. He fails in almost everything he tries to do, but he's so dogged and determined that you can't help but root for him. And then Superman would be an example of a character with all 3 set to maximum, which you've actually got to be careful with because that can get stale really fast. But so you really, and then like Elric would be a character with like the likability set all the way down.
Yeah,
liking him all the way down. So
yeah, I love Elric though, but he's got other things that make you root for him too. There's also like a damaged character you want to be fixed. It's all about what trajectory you want as a reader, and we could go on about this for hours, right? It's like you want Elric to be repaired. You want him to be happy, right? He's a broken character. So broken characters you want to be fixed. And, strong characters, you want them to soften, right? Because you perceive them as being too, like a harsh general. You want them to soften. So that works well with romance plots. There's whole different dynamics. I'm going to try to put all that in a book so people can know what they're doing and just have an idea of how to execute the story they have in their mind and their heart, and make it fun to read. So anyway, that's probably going to be it today. Anything else, Brian, before we go?
Thanks for having me on, and thanks
for being on.
Joining us.
And thanks for everybody in the chat. I really appreciate you hanging out with the new stream. Next week, I don't know what I have planned, so make sure you follow me on Twitter, David V. Stewart, and just pay attention. If you're on the mailing list, you should know I'm gonna have. I think next week we're going to talk about space opera, but we might have the show an hour later than normal, so we'll see about that. And so there we go. So thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next time.